Good evening, everyone. Is everyone enjoying their dinner? I cooked all day. So welcome. My name is Mindy Cohen. I'm the event coordinator at Gratz College, and I am so excited to see all these people who are excited about chickens. This is kind of cool. So I'm going to do a little bit of, kind of a get to know you thing. So one of my first questions, if you are a Gratz College alum, either the high school or the college, raise your hand. Wow, kind of cool. If you ever went on one of the Gratz College Israel trips, raise your hands. I'm the only one? Wow, okay. How many people have taken an AJL class, Adult Jewish Learning, at Gratz College, either in person or online? Okay, good. How many people have attended some of our lectures, the Schusterman lecture, the Stern lecture? Amazing. How many people have attended some of the One Book, One Jewish Community events that Gratz does? That's great. Just so you know, we are working on that right now to see what the next book is. How many people have come to the Tuzman Holocaust teach-in? Excellent. That will be next year in 2024. Keep an eye out. We've had some really great programs with that. This is my next fun question. If you grew up in Vineland, New Jersey, raise your hand. Or if you grew up on a chicken farm, raise your hand. Or if your family had a chicken farm, raise your hand. You people all probably know each other. If you grew up somewhere else in South Jersey that had something to do with chicken farmers, raise your hands. There we go. I know there were grocery stores, synagogues, all kinds of cool. My family's actually Atlantic City, so not quite as much. This is really exciting. Again, I'd like to apologize for Seth Stern not being here in person. One of the reasons we actually continue to have this in person is because so many of you probably know each other or probably have family relations that you don't really know. You haven't seen each other in 50 years. So now you have an idea of who's from Jersey. You can raise your hand and you can try to find them at some point. So that's one of the reasons. So again, I apologize for Seth not being here. It was a last minute thing and this just made the most sense. If you have not purchased a book yet, we still do have books available. They are available in the corner. They are $30 a piece. If you purchase a book and you would like a book plate, or if you have a book already and would like a book plate, we can send that. We're going to send Seth next week book plates. He will personalize them, send them back to us, and then we will mail them to you. So you just need to check in at the desk in the back and Evan will help you take care of that. So, just so you know, the summer adult education classes have ended. We are prepping for fall, and Rabbi Daniel Levitt will kind of give you an idea of what's coming up for fall. But keep an eye if you have any questions, ideas, we'd love to have them. We're going to be resuming our lunch and learns. So if you have not attended, if this is your first event that you've come to, we will be having lunch and learns again starting in September. So hopefully, we had an event in June, the Rebecca Gratz Tea Party. We had also about 90 people for that. So it's really nice to be doing things in person. Just for anybody who is an attorney in the room, we do have CLE on Thursday, August 3rd. We are partnering with Mission Kids. It is the response to child sex abuse and the Mission Kids multidisciplinary team approach to child abuse. It is a 2-credit CLE. Auditors are welcome. If you're interested, please come talk to me, or you can look at the Gratz website. That will help you. Couple things that are on your table. So number one, Seth Stern was really, really nice about the fact that he is not here, and lots of you have personal connections or personal stories you want to share with him. There are little slips of paper on the table that have his email address. So if you do want to contact him, please take that email, and that way you can get in touch with him. If you don't get one, let me know. I have lots of extras. The other thing on the table, there's a yellow for, the yolk of the chicken. I try to keep myself amused. I try to pick the colors of my evaluation forms. Please fill that out. You have a pen there. By doing this, this helps us figure out what we should be doing and what people are interested in. If for some reason you are not on our email list, if you registered for the program today, you will become on our email list. If not, there is on your table a QR code. You can click on that, and that will take you to the Gratz website, and you can register to be on our mailing list. The other thing is, if you like what you see, fill out the forms, let us know what you think, and tell your friends. Don't just tell us, tell your friends. There's also, if you really want to let us know how much you like us, there are envelopes on the table. If you'd like to make a donation, we are more than happy to accept it. You can take the envelope home with you. You don't have to do anything right now. It's just there just in case. So feel free to take one with you. Think about it. Give it to me tonight. Whatever makes you guys happy. If you do have any questions, I will be here all night. If you want to ask anything about programs that we do, how to get on our list, please come see me. And now I'd like to introduce you to Rabbi Daniel Levitt, who is the new director of Adult Jewish Learning at Gratz College.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Gratz, although I think most of you could be welcoming me. I'm only about 6 weeks into my this job, but it's been really exciting. I'm very much looking forward to the fall. We have a full lineup of classes that we are going to be revealing very soon. Most of the people's famous favorite teachers will be returning, as well as some expanded classes, in addition to Hebrew and Yiddish classes. And I've had multiple inquiries about Yiddish today, which is great. And you find the Yiddish teacher who's in the room. But overall, we want to be able to live Gratz's mission of furthering Jewish education and wisdom, and to do that in a way that builds community here at Gratz. And so I'm really been spending a lot of my time, as I started, getting to know people, meeting people, getting new ideas. And I'd love to get to know everybody here who has an interest in the Gratz programming, what you love, what you want to see more of, because the more I get to know you, the more we can program in a way that is engaging and builds community here. So that's something that I hope to be able to share with all of you and to get to know you better. And I don't want to speak for very long. I know what it's like to get between Jews and chicken, even if they speak Yiddish. So I would just say, by way of introduction, my father was born on a chicken farm, not in Vineland, though, not even in South Jersey, because they're from North Jersey, which isn't just the beach, apparently, is different, but even the chicken farms. And there's a strong Gratz connection to chicken farms and Vineland, because he's too humble to brag himself. But our president, Zev Elef's mother, was salutatorian of Vineland High, 1973. Pretty impressive. So without further ado, I think I will turn the program over to Zoom. I don't know how that works exactly, but I want to turn it over to Seth, our presenter, and learn about speaking Yiddish to chickens, which I think is going to be a fascinating and fun, but also serious experience. Thank you, Seth.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to Zev for inviting me to speak, to Mindy and her colleagues for scrambling to make this hybrid format work at the last minute, and to all of you for coming. I apologize for not being there in person. My son brought a virus, not COVID, home from Ramah Day Camp here in Maryland that I didn't want to share with you, along with the story of speaking Yiddish to chickens. I'm going to start with some introductory remarks and share a series of photos. I wasn't able to see how many, but I know many of you may have grew up in South Jersey, and so it either might trigger some warm memories for you or give a sense of the place for those who didn't grow up there. So if you could just bear with me for 1 second, I'm just going to share that screen here. Sorry. Okay. This book began nearly 25 years ago. While home studying for law school finals in December 1998, I visited my grandmother each afternoon and started asking her about her life over deli lunches. We talked about her growing up in Lublin, Poland, surviving the war in an underground dugout in a Polish forest, coming to the United States as refugees along with my grandfather. you can see my grandparents here. My grandfather wearing the hat. My mother is the baby in the middle with dark hair. My grandmother with facing the camera. They're pictured here on the Marine Perch, the former U.S. troop transport that brought them to the United States in February 1947. In the years that followed, I visited Lublin and Belzec, the extermination camp where my grandparents' families were killed, and Bensheim, the town in Germany where they lived as displaced persons. But the part of her story that came to fascinate me the most is how my grandparents and about 1,000 other survivors came to settle as poultry farmers in South Jersey. Now, this is a personal story for me, and I explore in my book how they wound up on the farm and how they came to share a single farmhouse with my grandmother's closest childhood friend and her daughter. And they wound up raising their daughters as twins for a number of years on the farm. And you can see here a picture of them in the range on their farm. That's the image on the cover of the book. But this is also a broader story about how Jews came to be farmers in the United States and how survivors wound up in this unique South Jersey community anchored by Vineland, New Jersey, halfway between Philadelphia and Atlantic City. Most Jewish immigrants in this country gravitated to big cities, but smaller numbers had always settled in rural America, whether that was Appalachia or Gold Rush, California, or the Mississippi Delta, where they usually started out as peddlers, selling whatever they could carry on their backs or on a horse, and then they often opened dry goods stores. A few had tried farming, often with the help of the Jewish Agricultural Society, which was a philanthropy founded by the German-born financier Baron Morris de Hirsch. By the 1930s, Jews farmed in all 48 then existing states. To figure out how to farm, many of these novice farmers with little experience turned to the Jewish Farmer, which was a monthly magazine pictured here, published in English and Yiddish starting in the early 1900s. It was still being published when survivors started settling on South Jersey farms. The first big wave of Jewish farming came in the 1880s when idealistic Russian Jews tried establishing communal farming colonies throughout the US. Most failed spectacularly due to malaria, bad weather, or the farmers' inexperience. The few colonies that survived were largely in South Jersey, in part because they were close to big markets in New York and New Jersey, and because it was closer to the kind of communities where the farmers might have had families and felt a connection. By the early 20th century, the Jewish Agricultural Society had given up on colonies and focused instead on settling Jewish farmers on individual family farms. They mostly concentrated in the northeastern US, from the Berkshires in Massachusetts down through Connecticut, the Catskills, and into New Jersey, in central New Jersey communities like Lakewood and Farmingdale. The form of farming that tended to work out the best was chicken farming. It required less capital, it was less physically demanding than other forms of agriculture, and it required less land. So it made sense to be able to settle in the kind of places where closer to the kind of places where other Jewish families might live. So when the first Jewish refugees to make it out of Germany arrived during the Depression, the Jewish Agricultural Society saw poultry farming as the perfect solution. This was at the time the Great Depression, and American Jewish philanthropists feared that Americans would see Jewish refugees taking American jobs. And instead, if you were able to place them on farms that other people weren't necessarily looking to settle on, that was viewed as a great solution. In South Jersey, where farms were cheaper than in those other places I mentioned, like northern Jersey or the Berkshires or the Catskills, that was where they started directing these refugees. So there was an influx of refugee farmers in and around Vineland, the city of 30,000 people. As this photo of Vineland's Main Street, Landis Avenue from that era shows, it looked like many small sort of main streets throughout America. There was a Woolworth's, a Sears, a Pontiac dealer, and many Jewish-owned shops, just like elsewhere in rural America. It was uniquely laid out by its founder, a land speculator lawyer named Charles Landis. laid out with glass and clothing factories on very strict street grids, and the factories here mingled with farms. The descendants of the original Italian immigrants grew fruits and vegetables, and the Jewish farmers tended to gravitate to chickens. I wanted to give a sense to everyone who might not be familiar with it, sort of the scale of things. So this is an image of a typical Vineland farm in the 50s. You can see here, this is the range, and you can see coops in the background. These farms might be 10 acres in size. A family-owned farm at the time, you could have 3,000 or so chickens, and that was enough to support a family. Here you could see the range where the birds were outside. And this is just to give a sense of the inside of one of the coops where the chickens spent a lot of their time, and where they were fed, and where they had water, and where they spent the night. In this era, poultry was king in Vineland. The high school dubbed its football team the Poultry Clan, and the city hosted a poultry festival in the mid-1950s, pictured here, that boasted the world's largest frying pan. There were also dozens of hatcheries and feed mills, a world-renowned poultry vaccine maker, and many of these chicken or poultry businesses were Jewish-owned, including Rubinoff's feed mill, where many of the survivors bought their chicken feed. It was also a community with an unusually large concentration of Jewish residents. I'd mentioned earlier how Jews had settled in rural America going back decades. But by the 50s, most of these rural Jewish communities had shrunk as Jews, like everyone else in rural America, had begun migrating to big cities or to the suburbs. But in Vineland, thanks to the descendants of the original farm colony settlers and the German refugees that followed, they built a remarkably robust Jewish community full of synagogues, kosher bakeries, butcher shops, and delis. Some of you who might have grown up in Vineland might remember Goldstein's Deli, where people decades later remembered how good the pastrami was, or some of the bakeries where you could smell the rye bread half a block away on Saturdays. In the 1950s, Manischewitz opened a plant in Vineland where it made borscht and gefilte fish, and it took out ads in Jewish papers throughout the country bragging about the fact that the eggs for the gefilte fish were from, as you see in the ad, quote, from the famous Vineland, New Jersey egg farms. The survivors who heard about Vineland largely through word of mouth would further enrich the Jewish community and make it their own. They built shtiebels or small shuls, often with their own hands, within walking distance of their farms. This is the one with the Hebrew name for the term surviving remnant, which took on as a way to describe the survivors after the war. This particular shtiebel was on the same block as my grandparents' farm. And here you can see 5 of the members of the lay-led community getting ready for the first high holiday services in the mid-1950s. The survivors, I'll show one more. This is a favorite picture of mine. When the Torah for the shtiebel arrived, they paraded out very proudly, marched outside the shtiebel, and pictured in the front holding the staff is my grandfather. The survivors created the Jewish Poultry Farmers Association, a Landsmannschaft, or combination mutual aid society and social club, like the ones earlier generations of immigrants established in big cities. Their Verband, the Yiddish word for association, as they called it, held events in Yiddish and English. They hosted the stars of the Yiddish stage of Europe, comedians, poets, journalists who, like the farmers, were survivors and had to perform wherever the scattered remnants of European Jewry had settled in the Americas. And they performed to standing room only crowds at the local high school in Vineland, the only venue, or middle school, the only venues large enough to hold a big crowd at the time. They hosted dinner, dances for the adults, and all sorts of events for the kids, including this Lag BaOmer bonfire in 1955. They also commemorated what would later come to be known as the Holocaust. I try to show in the book that survivors weren't a monolith. They varied widely in how much success they had, how observant they were in their religious practice, how they dealt with the trauma they experienced. And I'd be happy to explore any of those themes in the question and answer that follows. Many of the survivors had very warm memories of their life there, while others hated every minute of rural life. They'd grown up in big cities. They viewed this as a tremendous sort of come down in their station and their status. This is a photo of my mother that she still has on a shelf at home on Long Island. This is her and her friend who grew up together and were raised as twins. You could see they're wearing the same dress. Their hair is done up in the same fashion, and they're holding baby chicks. And my mother still has this on a shelf. It brings to her such warm memories of farm life. But it was also a hard life. And they were at the mercy of weather, of chickens' health in the markets. Birds could be nasty, and their waste smelled bad. You had to wake up early and could never take a vacation because the chickens needed to be fed 7 days a week. The picture here shows in 1954, Hurricane Hazel destroyed coops and killed thousands of birds. In hindsight, given how things played out, the lucky ones might have been those who used insurance proceeds from their damaged farms and coops to start another business or leave Vineland altogether. They had entered egg farming at the worst possible moment. It was a time when small family farms were finding it increasingly hard to compete with mega farms in the South that had much lower labor costs and could support farming on a much more massive scale, where 3,000 chickens might have sufficed for a family farm in Vineland. Now, the scale was you needed 50,000, 100,000, and ultimately 1 million birds to be able to operate efficiently and be able to compete. And so as the 60s progressed, the survivor farmers found it increasingly hard to make a living, and many began abandoning their farms or South Jersey altogether to find better work. My grandparents and mother stayed until after my mother graduated high school there in 1964. And in the decade that followed, nearly every farm ceased operating, and the Jewish community began to shrink just as similar rural communities had already contracted almost everywhere else in America. I hope I've helped preserve their story in this book and give some sense of what a unique place this was in that era. I also had a more selfish motive in writing this book and in dedicating a chunk of the last century to researching it. If nothing else, I hope my college-age niece and nephew who got to know my grandmother before she died in 2014 will read this. I've given them each a copy, though college students home from summer for the summer aren't necessarily inclined to be reading. One day, I hope my 7-year-old son Ezra, who was born a year after my grandmother died, will also learn this story and perhaps share it with his children. He's pictured here at a temporary exhibit at the National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia that they did on New Jersey's Jewish farmers back in 2016. So thank you all for listening. I realize many of you have your own connections to the South Jersey farming community or questions that you'd like to answer, might like me to answer more directly. So as Mindy mentioned, I'm happy if you want to get in touch via email. There's also a book Facebook page where you could see some of the pictures I've shared here and others. And happy to turn it over to questions. Thank you again.
Seth, thank you so much for this wonderful talk, and welcome everybody one more time. My name is Naomi Hausman, and let me move this phone. So I'm going to facilitate the Q&A. Would anybody like to jump in and start? Yes, right here. And do we have the mics on in the room? Okay, give us one moment till when you see the green light, the red turned to green, that means that your voice can be heard on the Zoom. And that means Seth can hear it. Okay, there we go. We have our green light. And if you would stand, if possible, and let us know your question, and I'll repeat it for the whole room. Yes, hi.
Hi, my name is Rita Ratzin. My very first question is, I was waiting to hear who spoke Yiddish to the chickens, because that's the title of the book. So I suppose everyone there spoke Yiddish. I grew up speaking Yiddish, and I wanted to know about that because I teach Yiddish here at Gratz College now. So where did that come in?
And can you just introduce yourself, since you're part of our team here?
Rita Ratzin. I teach Yiddish here at Gratz College, all phases.
All right, thank you, Rita.
Well,
For those of you who heard the question is, who spoke Yiddish to the chickens? To ask our author, our speaker, to say a little bit about the Yiddish speakers and who they were and all that. So thank you.
Sure. The title comes from the fact that in oral history interviews, I was struck by how many of the survivor farmers joke that part of the appeal of becoming a poultry farmer is that the chickens didn't speak Yiddish, didn't care if you spoke Yiddish to them. And there was an element of truth there. I mean, these survivors came to the United States. They had lost their families. They came with nothing in many cases, or very little. Their educations had been interrupted, whether high school or college, and they didn't know English. So that really limited the kind of job opportunities they might have. And they came to the US after the war, when there was demobilization of the military, there was a housing shortage, and finding a job, finding a place to live was a real challenge. And so for so many of them, farming was a real opportunity. Part of it was perhaps they didn't really know about farming, and so the idea of a bucolic country life and being your own boss, and it didn't matter if you didn't know English, it took on an idyllic hue in their minds. The reality, as I alluded to in my introduction, was different. It was a very hard life in terms of physical labor, the economics of it, but at least initially, it was very alluring. And part of it was the idea that the chickens didn't care if you spoke Yiddish to them.
Great, thank you. Good choice for that title. Any other, I thought question up front, yes.
I mean, my father-in-law, whose daughter is my wife, who's beautiful, and it was actually in the book. He made the book. He used to get calls day and night all the time, and he loved his work as a consultant to the chicken farmers of South Jersey. And from that point of view, he had a wonderful career, but he was also employed by Rutgers in the Extension Service. And that part was different. He felt a strong sense of anti-Semitism in academia at that particular time. What do we know about how these people integrated or not into the wider society, academia in particular?
Seth, did you hear that?
I think so. Do you want me to respond, or did you want to repeat the question for those in the audience?
So the question is, so it was your father-in-law, right? Who and so the question was basically how was the integration into?
He had a certain sense of paranoia about his Judaism.
Oh, so
And I don't know how much of it was systemic or how much of it was him.
okay, so just yes, how did the assimilation and integration in society go for many of these folks who came? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated story in terms of, I could sort of talk about the assimilation first, that as I mentioned, the survivor farmers sort of kept to themselves to an extent. They created their own association, social club, but they also wanted their children to become fully American. So they might have sent their kids to the Jewish day school, but they also wanted them to join the Little League teams and the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts. So it was very much like other immigrants, that trying to keep one foot in one world and one foot in the new world. It's also a complex story in terms of relationships, both within the Jewish community, how the existing Jewish community treated the survivors, and how the survivors interacted with the non-Jewish community in Vineland. And I could talk about each of those a little bit. In terms of the Jewish community, it's hard to untangle now. The survivors certainly felt, many of them, unwelcome at the time. And whether that was a function of their own insecurities or whether it was the fact that the earlier generations of Jewish immigrants there felt somehow threatened by the presence of newcomers with their funny accents, might undermine their own sort of insecure sense of being American. It was consistent with the earlier German Jewish refugees who also kept to themselves and didn't feel welcome. But ultimately, this changed with time, certainly among the children of the survivors and what followed. Many of the children of survivors joked to me about intermarriage because they married American-born Jews, or in the case of my mom, she became close friends with some of the children of the German Jewish refugees. And similarly, in terms of the non-Jewish community, which was sort of predominantly, but not entirely Italian-American at the time, the mayors were Italian. They tended to be owners of a lot of the businesses in Vineland. And it was a mixed bag. Some of the Jewish survivors and their children experienced anti-Semitism, and many others spoke about the generous acts of Italian-American residents in Vineland. In one case, taking sick children to Philadelphia for treatment, or taking animals to be slaughtered in a kosher manner. So it really is a complex story, and I try to capture the nuance there in the book.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to go to this side of the room and then I'll come back to this side. You right here in the back. Yep.
So my name is Celia Pretter. I actually I was born in 62 and grew up on the Happy Hen Farm in Vineland. My sister's here. She's a little bit older. But I will say that there was a very intense stratification among the Jews in Vineland. It was very felt between those who were college educated or physicians and stuff and those of farmers. I don't think it faded into my high school years, and I'm 61. I think that it was very well felt within the synagogues and who ran some of the synagogues that were newer, and it was problematic. But I do think that among the non-Jewish residents, it was varied, like it was both with other first generation kids, maybe who were Italian or Latino, especially, that there was a lot of integration. But I do think the stratification within the community was very strong and still exists now with people I know, and I live in Philly now. I just think that there was a lot of animosity, especially with sort of intelligentsia versus greeners, which we were in the greener, which meant greenhorn, and it's problematic. Doesn't
Do you
mean
have a
every-
question? about
No,
that?
I just
want to make a comment.
leave it, yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you're saying applied still in my generation, so I'm kind of the next generation up.
So thank you. So not a question, but interesting comment and observation about class stratification that you personally experienced
very
growing up
much.
there across the generation.
Even if you were as academic as the
Mhm.
next person.
Thank you. Okay, I promise that.
Comment?
We'll come up to the microphone.
Okay, I will read, we don't have a traveling mic, so.
Yeah.
So if you are joining us on Zoom tonight, I wanted to let you know to put your questions in the Q&A tool, and we'll do our best to answer those as well. So I promise I'd go to this side of the room. So any questions over there? Yes, please. And use your big teacher voice for us. I'll repeat the question as well. Thanks.
I'm a teacher.
Oh, there you go. I had a feeling. Okay.
Hi, Seth. I'm Allison Shimon. On page 202, you mentioned something about a Harry Rothman, the Associate Cumberland County Agricultural Agent. I'm standing right next to Harry Rothman's youngest great-grandchild. I am one of his grandchildren. My mother is his daughter. So thank you very much for giving him such a great shout out on page 202. Thank you.
Okay, I just got a little chill. Thank you, Allison. So if you didn't hear it, on the other side of the room, we have the great grandson
Yes.
of the gentleman who's described in the book. So thank you for sharing.
Well,
that.
thank you so much for coming. And I would say about just on that point, there were a number of people in the community, and I try to talk about them in the book, who were so helpful to the survivors. Some of them were in the farming business, or in the case of Mr. Rothman, sort of an agricultural agent who went around and helped new farmers or other farmers just figure out what they were doing. And these survivor farmers could use all the help they could get because most of them really had no farming experience. They had no idea what they were doing. And besides from the Jewish farmer at the outset, it wasn't like you could watch a YouTube video at the time and figure out how to be a chicken farmer. So it was tremendously challenging. And those that welcomed them were really very helpful in their integration and path into farming.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you again. And let's take this, you in the back. Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jack Trachtenberg Seth, and when a friend of mine sent me word about the book, I read the book review. I realized I recognized all the people on the cover except for one male, and Seth's mother and the other blonde little girl were my playmates as children. So I am most pleased to see you even on a video. You did a wonderful job in the book. On the subject of what people spoke, my parents absolutely spoke Yiddish, but their main language was Polish. And I think different families spoke different languages depending on their backgrounds and maybe educational levels of religiosity. My primary language was Polish until I was 8 years old. And I'm now the unofficial translator where I work sometimes in my broken Polish. Anyway, great job, Seth.
Thank you. And I guess I should have expanded on the point about languages. Yes, absolutely. So I would say there were many languages being spoken among the survivor farmers, the largest number of whom were from Poland. I mean, that was also just the largest Jewish community in Eastern Europe at the time. But there were other languages spoken. To some extent, Yiddish became the common language and the language of the Jewish Poultry Farmers Association and the language that many of the performers performed in. But given how many survivor farmers there were, and this was such a unique concentration, the likes of which you might have only seen in certain places in Brooklyn or the Bronx or the other boroughs of New York City, that the survivors could sort of congregate. So if you spoke Hungarian, you could have a poker game or a card game, and that's often one form of socializing. The farmers would gather each week and rotate among their farmhouses. Those who spoke Hungarian might have their own card game, and those who wanted to sort of joke around and talk in Yiddish had their own. So that's part of the story too. The number of survivors meant they could have these sub-communities within.
Great, thank you, Seth. Okay, Jerry, please.
Was there any connection between the Jewish farm school near Doylestown and the farmers in South Jersey?
My understanding in terms of the question was about the farm schools. There were several, some of them were related to Zionist groups, and the Jewish Agricultural Society operated one. These were more in operation prior to World War II, at least one, because the flow of refugees and other immigrants got cut off completely during the war, got turned into another use. So that when the survivors came, there wasn't a training school available that they could go to and learn. Eventually, the Jewish Agricultural Society had its own agent in Vineland and had other programs in New York to give some, at least a little training, but there wasn't any sort of, to my understanding, any formal training available like that after the war.
Okay, so we did get one question on Zoom. The question is about, let's see, I'll just read it to you. There was a Jewish veterinarian who found the vaccine for the disease that destroyed the chicken industry. Sorry, I don't have my glasses. He had a lab on Landis Avenue. A book was written about this event. Cannot remember the doctor's name or the name of the book. Can you help with that, Seth?
Sure, I think you're referring, the questioner is referring to the Vineland Poultry Laboratories, which was founded by Arthur Goldhaft, and he was a very prominent member of the Jewish community and the global poultry industry. I think I got an email from one member of his family saying they might be in attendance there. I don't know if that's the case, but yeah, he was a very prominent member of the Jewish community and a real success story in his own right. His parents were immigrants. They had unsuccessfully been part of the colonies in the Vineland area. His mom was a midwife, and he managed to go to the University of Pennsylvania, get a veterinary degree. At first, he thought he was going to care for horses, but the Model T sort of had him looking for another path, and he wound up focusing on chickens and ultimately vaccines in Vineland.
Fascinating. Thank you. Did you want to?
Great uncle.
So you can't see can you see our audience? Yes, you can.
I cannot, no.
Okay.
I sent Seth the email last week.
Oh, okay.
The email was from a gentleman I'm looking right at here. So thank you both for.
And the
Yes.
name of the book is The Golden Egg.
The Golden Egg, the autobiography.
Okay, The Golden Egg is the name of the autobiography.
Yes.
Cool. Yes.
The name was Cutler when she was growing up. It was amazing. When you're doing your research for your book, did you come across any information about Harlem, Rosenane Jewish community?
About what's the name of the Jewish community?
Harlem and Rosenane,
Okay.
right near.
Okay, so the question was, did you come across any historical in your research, any historical facts about these two communities? And one more time, the name of those? Carmel and Rosenane?
Rosenhain. Yeah, so those are from the colony era, when the Jewish immigrants tried to form these collective farming communities in the community. These were sort of within a few miles of Vineland, Alliance being the most famous example. Now, this was the earlier era, and I certainly mention it, but that's not the focus of the book. There have been other books, and I'd be happy to recommend those via email about the earlier colony era. But my focus is really on the post-war, the survivors.
Great. Okay, let's see. Marty, yes.
Marty Tubman, proudly to say, somewhere between Franklinville and Elmer, 11 acres, 10,000 chickens. So, and what a wonderful life, and what a great piece of work you've done. And I've kind of lived my life in the fascination looking in the rearview mirror a few hundred years. And certainly from the time of the development of Zionism, around the same time that the first agriculturalists showed up in Alliance, right? So, Zionism and its roots are the late 1870s, 80s in Eastern Europe. And of course, the first settling was funded by Baron de Hirsch, 1882. I'm wondering whether, I didn't get all that until later in life. I'm wondering if you found much of that energy, awareness, enthusiasm of the work of the chicken farming communities there, and that we were at the same time doing this while the kibbutz movement, while Israel was being settled, while there were all these kids that were being trained in Eastern Europe, as my father was, to go to Israel and settle a kibbutz. The war breaks out. His brother got there. He didn't. He winds up on a Jewish chicken farm in South Jersey. So did you see much of that connection and feel it in the contemporary time? And also, was there any exchange program? Was there any consciousness in Israel of all these Jewish agricultural movements throughout the United States and in South Jersey?
Great. Okay, so that's a great question. So the question is from Marty Tubman, and whose family had a chicken farm in Vineland. And the question is about whether there's a conscious connection between the agricultural movement and Zionism, the sort of a confluence in that era.
Well, I'd say first of all that that the survivor farmers who came here, there wasn't the same sort of idealism that you saw among the colony era of the 1880s. The survivors were mostly looking for a way to find a way to make a living, to integrate into American life. They weren't motivated by larger ideals about sort of how wonderful agrarian life might be, or to show that Jews could farm. There was no larger purpose to what they were doing. than to helping themselves and their families. That said, I think they did identify with Zionism. Many of them, as you mentioned, might have wound up in Palestine and then Israel if not for the war, or even after the war was something they considered. And they identified, if not with the kibbutzim, the moshavim, which was a not quite as collective, but also a collective form of agriculture in Israel. And so there were some similarities. I wouldn't want to overdo it, though, and suggest that they were creating their own little kibbutz in South Jersey, but they certainly identified with Israel overall. And there were instances, there was a training farm in Vineland where American Jews learned how to farm and then would move to Israel. And so there was something of a connection that way, but I didn't find too many instances or any of Jewish survivor farmers viewing chicken farming in South Jersey as a sort of entryway or catapult to a life of agriculture in Israel.
Thank you. Yes.
Which is a suburb of Vineland. And I would like to ask Seth, how did you come to the people that you interviewed? Or did you interview people outside of Vineland province?
Sure.
Let me just
the question in terms of my research, how did I come to interview the people that I interviewed? I could walk through a little my method. I mentioned in my introduction that I started interviewing my grandmother and realized I wanted to do something broader than just a family history, and talked to my mother at length, but then did broaden it out and began doing interviews with other survivors who I met sort of word of mouth. I talked to one and find others. The Jewish Federation had done a very valuable series of oral history interviews with a dozen or so survivors and earlier German Jewish refugees. I went through the Steven Spielberg Shoah Foundation, looking for oral histories there, and the Holocaust Memorial Museum. So I wound up I did about 80 plus interviews with people, survivors, their children, others in South Jersey, and went through dozens and dozens of other oral histories. It wasn't possible to do sort of a census or speak to everyone. I did try to limit my focus to Vineland and the surrounding communities. There were there were survivors who settled elsewhere, as far as Southern California on poultry farms. But the Vineland area was by far the largest concentration of survivor farmers anywhere in the United States.
Right, yes, in the back. Yes, yep.
I was 14. And my uncle took me on his farm. He, with tremendous trauma, had managed to escape from Nazi Germany. And for 10 years, he was able, with the help of the Jewish National Farmers thing, to have a chicken farm, and without any training, but like nearly all the farmers, this is from Farmingdale, New Jersey, not from Vineland. Nearly every farmer that I know who was a Holocaust survivor lost their farm when the price of eggs didn't reach with the price of feed. And the comment I have, it's amazing how one after another of the ones who lost their farm were somehow able to pull their life together and continue. I think it was a thing of beauty and something that I know I looked in awe on around me when I saw farmers losing everything, having come from tremendous trauma and still being able to continue and make a new life after the farm. My particular instance, my uncle was not somebody who had any training in farming, while my cousin's father he went to Rutgers University and took courses and was able to maintain the farm for a longer period of time. As a matter of fact, he's still doing farming, although not chicken farming. Just a comment of how I revere the survivors who were able to move on after going broke. And I'm sure that in Vineland, the number of people who lost their farm was equal to what I saw in Toms River, Howe and Farmingdale.
So in case you didn't hear, that's a tough one to encapsulate, but just reverence, an expression of great reverence for the resilience through trauma of that so many people.
Yeah, it is remarkable. And the fact that so many went in with perhaps unrealistic expectations about what it would be like, how hard it was, and then expecting or hoping for an easier life after all they had gone through in the war, and then having, at least in terms of as a business, a very, very tough time. As you said, the egg prices collapsed in the 50s. It became almost unsustainable as a business. And to have to start over, and so many of them did start over with mixed success, but some opened motels and hotels, whether in Vineland or Atlantic City. There were people who went off to Toronto and became real estate developers. They became small business owners and shopkeepers, and some of them, it's a very unfortunate ends. There were instances in both Washington and Los Angeles. I think one was a convenience store, one was a liquor store, where farmer survivors moved and opened these businesses and then were killed during robberies, the late sort of the unstable urban times of the late 60s.
So Seth, we have 2 comments about Norma Beach. Your comment and question sparked something here and from the Zoom room. So one attendee made this comment. I have very fond memories of being a kid and spending summer days with my family at the place we called Norma Beach in Alliance on the Maurice River. I saw that you have a photo of it on your book's Facebook page. That photo triggered those memories, as I don't have any photos myself and understand it no longer exists as it was then. Are there any details you can share with the audience tonight about that place?
This was an amazing little place, and it struck me in every person, whether they had good memories overall of farming and Vineland, the warm memories they had of Norma Beach. This was in Alliance, the one of the original colonies, and it was a stretch of the Maurice River where, even going back to the colony eras, the colony era farmers would wash their clothes and swim in that era. And it was still a gathering place for the Jewish community through the war years and after. And the survivors really claimed it as their own, and they would go there. And one I loved, referred to it as their Riviera. It was this little stretch of beach alongside a river. I don't know if you'd call it a stream in terms of its depth and its width at that point, but they'd gather there, and the farmers or their wives might play cards and sun themselves and talk in Yiddish or whatever other language, and their children would play. And there was a concession stand, and the kids would buy pretzels, and the teenagers there was a jukebox, and they'd dance. And it really was just a very idyllic, special place that everyone had very warm memories of. And it is a place that's gone. It got polluted and junk, and the concession stand burned down in the 70s. It is lost in time, and I had trouble finding photos of it, although within the last few weeks I saw a posting on the Visit to Vineland, or one of the Facebook pages, where it was the Alliance Alliance Colony Community Descendants, and someone had posted even more pictures of it. So I guess I hadn't looked hard enough over 25 years. So there are more pictures out there.
Great, thank you. Anybody? Yes.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Silverman from Philadelphia, my brother Jerry, and our parents took us to a place called Richard's Farm. If anybody has been to Richard's Farm, oh my God. Well, okay, so it's a testament to the intermingling of Jewish families who did not live in Vineland. I don't know how my parents found out about this place, but it was a farm and they had quite a bit of housing, small rooms and so forth that could accommodate guests. And we would go there, and my recollection is we might have gone there for a week at a time or maybe long weekends. And Mrs. Richards did all the cooking. And we, the kids, went out into the fields and we picked tomatoes and we picked corn, and the excitement of being a kid and having picked the corn, and an hour later we're having it for dinner. It was supreme. And about the egg farmers, and they whoever arranged it, I don't know, but someone arranged for the girls, and they might have done the same for the boys too, but for the girls to have dates with the sons of the egg farmers. And we were out on the town, probably going to a movie. I mean, what are you gonna do when you're 13? And her son went to culinary school and he became, wonderful memories. And they were mostly from Philadelphia and from New York. And I know my parents would talk about the friends that they made. That was fond memories.
Okay, so let me repeat that. Thank you so much. Fond memories, she was sharing about Richard's Farm, for Jews who were not in violence and non-Jews to come to the farm for a few days, stay there. Mrs. Richards would cook for everybody. Her son became a great chef and they got to pick corn and have a wonderful time. So just sharing some beautiful memories. Thank you for that. And Seth,
Yeah, this was a model that you're describing that a lot of farmers in places like the Catskills and the Berkshires, they had to supplement their farm income earlier decades. They would have summer boarding houses, and Jewish families who lived cooped up in tenements in New York would come out, and this was a way to have a little vacation and country life. It wasn't really a model so much, and this is the first instance I've heard in the Vineland area, because the allure for people was much more to the beach, you would want to go to the shore communities. So Vineland wasn't exactly a draw compared to the beach. And by the 50s, with air travel and air conditioning, there were a lot more opportunities for vacationing, if you had the money at least. But there was at least one, I know of one of the survivor families, they moved to Atlantic City. They opened a boarding house and they had a very famous kitchen that would serve every kind of Eastern European Jewish delicacy. And it got write-ups in the New York Times and other places where they would have the recipes that they cooked in their very popular dining room.
so somebody commented on Zoom that her wedding reception was held, or his wedding reception was held at Richard's Farm. I don't know who it was, but anybody by show of hands know Richard's Farm? No? Natalie, yes.
Howard, who had that restaurant in his
Right.
three-story house.
Right.
And made delicious food. Both survivors from Poland.
Yeah.
Natalie, you said you interviewed Jack. Oh, okay. So you interviewed a Holocaust survivor for the Holocaust Oral History Archive here at Gratz. Thank you. Let me take somebody I haven't called on. Yes.
How did the refugee survivors get the startup capital? Start this farm?
How did the farmers get their startup capital to start these farms? Is the question.
Well, that's a very good question. And as I mentioned, they didn't have much money, a lot of them. And what they would do is they would seek help from the agencies that had helped them come to the US, HIAS, and the other one in the case of my family, United Service for New Americans, would help them come over. And the Jewish Agricultural Society, they would ask for help, and they would get help in the form of a second mortgage. So they had to come up with some money because the Jewish Agricultural Society didn't want people who had no capital. So often that meant trying to get something from an uncle or an aunt, whatever relatives they might have in the United States. Or in other cases, they pooled their resources. Like my grandparents shared a farm with another family, and many families did that. Often it went very badly. You would be sharing this tiny little farmhouse with another family, and it often imploded in acrimony. In my grandparents' case, it lasted for, they were able to stay together for 4 or 5 years, and their friendship endured the rest of their lives, nearly a century now, their daughters as well. But it was a challenge to get the money. And then you, no matter what, you had this mortgage that you found it increasingly difficult to pay off as egg prices fell. And so that was part of why you had so many foreclosures and bankruptcies. It wasn't straight aid. The Jewish Agricultural Society wasn't just writing checks and people were free and clear. So they were burdened with debt when they started farming.
Okay, any other questions on this side? Marty, you get another one? Yep.
How much anti-Semitism you uncovered in your research. We were about 15 miles out of Vineland, and we felt there was a tremendous backlash or resentment of all these Jews coming into Vineland and taking over so much of the community. We were one of the few out of where we were that were Jewish, and were ultimately kind of tortured in school, beat up. My sister's hair was cut off looking for horns. And the principal finally said, your kids are causing too much trouble. You got to take them out of school. So we went to yeshivas from then on. And I'm wondering either during.
The microphones are really sensitive. Thank you.
I'm wondering either during the time, did you find research about anti-Semitic reaction either in Vineland or in the surrounding areas? Or was there then backlash and resentment after all these Jews left finally, that they had a sense that that there was a resurgence of that resentment or anti-Semitism?
Great question. Thank you, Marty. So the question is about anti-Semitism. What did you find in your research, Seth?
There was definitely instances, and what you're describing is consistent with what I heard, where it was more frequent the further you got from the center of Vineland, where there might have been fewer Jews, and they were more of the outliers. You heard resentment even among the earlier German Jewish refugees. They felt like they came during the height of the Depression and they had it so hard, and now these survivors were coming and they felt like they were getting more help. And that whether that was the truth or was just their perception, but there was resentment even within the Jewish community. But yes, there were certainly instances of anti-Semitism. It wasn't universal, though. It wasn't something described by everyone. And some of the children of survivors described in one moment being the target of anti-Semitism, the kids roughing them up on their bike because it was around Easter time. And then a few hours later, inviting the same boy to play baseball with them. So it was certainly a mix of hostility and welcome and something in between.
Did anything in your research uncover anti-Semitism following
Yeah, there was evidence as the 70s went on, the kind of vandalism of Jewish institutions in Vineland. The Jewish day school was vandalized, the Stiebels that I described, even one of the main synagogues in the 60s or 70s. So there was a lot of instances of vandalism throughout that period, whether it was mischief-making teenagers or something more sinister. There was evidence of that for sure.
Okay, thank you. I think we're just going to take a few more questions and then we're going to wrap for the evening and you all can chat with each other. You have one more question for us?
I have a
comment. Okay.
I have a comment. When I grew up in Norma, which was the original Alliance colony, right? I had friends of all different nationalities. I had Black friends, I had Hispanic friends, I had non-Jewish friends. And I never felt any anti-Semitism in Norma. And also in Vineland, I guess I was fortunate enough, but my friends and I that were Jewish and were children of Holocaust survivors never experienced that. Not at Norma Elementary School. I don't know how it branched out, but I never felt that at all.
Thank you for sharing that. So she did not experience anti-Semitism.
Yeah. And I heard that range of experience where people would say exactly that and others would say something different. So I don't know if it's a function of where you lived in Vineland or the years you were growing up, but there was a real range of experiences when it came to anti-Semitism.
Great. Okay, I see two more hands. We're gonna start here and then we'll come back there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I hope I'm clear on oh, it's like, kind of emotional somewhat. I grew up in Clayton, New Jersey.
Hey, I know.
My grandfather had a kosher chicken packing plant. So I went sometimes with my father to Vineland, New Jersey, to the chicken farms, because my father in the family was the one that did all the negotiating. He was the one that would go and say, oh, I'll buy this chicken, buy that. Okay, this is the price we'll go by, you know, and all this kind of stuff. My grandfather was somebody who wanted to make the place like a farm. So we had cows, we had horses, just for us to play with, you know, for the cousins. I had 8 cousins that would visit. I lived on the farm. I always called it a farm. But I also want to bring up that in Clayton, New Jersey, why some Jews came there at first was because there was a place called Silver Lake. You know, at first, because that was like a resort area. But then at a certain point, at one time, they didn't allow Jews to go there. When I was very young, they didn't have Jews, and then they allowed it. You know, so there was a combination of things, but like, I didn't have that much problems. Like Clayton, when I graduated, there was a total of one point in time during my year, there was maybe a total of 7 kids who were Jewish in Clayton, New Jersey. And, you know, that was, most of them were my family. I think all of them were my family. They were from my family. And that, you know, so, but I never had a problem. The grandfather used to get phone calls from the police. Ben, you got the cows loose again. You got to go pick them up. Like in other words, in Clayton, New Jersey, with Dusty Drive, the cows from our farm would somehow get loose, and they would go out there. They would go out on Dusty Drive, so he had to go pick them up. So I had a lot of fond memories growing up, you know, on that I always called it the chicken farm, but really it was a kosher chicken packing plant. But you know, but my grandfather made it into that, and it was just like neat. It was just like a neat thing. You know, and this is really great. I mean, with all everybody's memories, and I know Norma. I mean that, you know, and I know, of course, I know Vineland. I have some cousins that live there. You know, so when I went to the actual chicken farms and, you know, played with the kids, why my father was negotiating with the chicken farmer. You know, so.
Well, thank you for that reflection about Clayton, New Jersey, Silver Lake's beautiful. So our last question, yes. Okay.
Because I did love Vineland and I love growing up on a chicken farm. 3 things. First of all, if you go to the Italian market currently.
Stand up, please.
Sorry, if you go to, still end on a nice note. If you go to the Italian market currently and walk into Carl's Fresh Poultry, there's still a sign from 75 years ago that says fresh Vineland eggs. They don't sell them, but it's still there. Also, if you go to Norma, I don't know that I'd wash your clothes there because it's cedar water and you turn orange, but that was half the fun. Third thing, there's a new alliance in Alliance Norma, which is a movement of former grandkids of survivors that are starting a farming community in Alliance, New Jersey by the Levins. It's pretty active. They live in Brooklyn and they bought property in Norma Alliance, and they're starting there's not only an organic farm that supplies.
They just planted a vineyard.
Yeah,
I went there.
yeah, Vineland, they supply the Philadelphia community, so it's more plants than animals. But you know, they take visitors, and there's a small synagogue there that's beautiful.
Yes, so thank you for sharing that. I did read that story in the Inquirer. The Levins from Brooklyn, our descendants, came back to. Yep, they kind of reignited the farming community there. So that's a wonderful story. So
The
with
Levins are.
I'm sorry. Yes, Seth, please. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that's a wonderful ending point. Harry Levin, William Levin's grandfather, was a lawyer in Vineland, a small town lawyer who helped so many of the survivors. They remembered him so fondly and all the help he provided. And he was sort of a receptacle of local history, and his family had helped form the Alliance Colony, and the continuity there with William and his family trying to restart or re-energize Jewish agriculture in the area. It's a really nice piece of history.
Wonderful. So let us all thank you, Seth Stern. We wish you a speedy recovery.
Well, thank you. This has this has been such a nice experience, and I appreciate all the questions and memories that you shared. And please do follow up if you'd like via email.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and come visit us sometime here at Gratz College.
Will
All right,
do.
everybody, thanks for coming. Be well. There are evaluation forms on your tables. We would love your feedback.